Cool. I'm so glad everyone is here today. As I was saying, I just feel so grateful that Julia asked us to think about having this conversation. So Julia Dees is here, and I'm grateful for her leading the way on this, because I think this is an important national conversation we're having, and I think it's an important conversation that we need to be having within the church too. So it really makes me happy to see all these faces here this morning. Introduction. Marjorie was telling her funny story of how she thought she knew Curtis Boyd, but it was a different one. And so just by accident, we got in contact with Curtis and Glenna. Okay, so we're so glad to have you here, and we'll let you guys introduce yourselves. And then Joan, I'm sorry, I'm blanking on last name.
Lemonian Sanford.
Lemonian Sanford, that's right. And she is the director of the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice. Right, and so I've known Joan for a while, and I'm glad she's here with us this morning. Has a lot of experience in these conversations in religious context. So welcome to Joan, and I just hand it over and invite you to introduce yourselves and start off.
We can pick up the matter for speaking.
No, please not.
Oh, no. I thought you must have to think that.
We're all still figuring this out. Yeah.
We're all figuring everything out.
I want sort of what we've set out to feel like I'm speaking for 5 to 10 minutes. We want to leave a lot of time for discussion, questions. So I'm going to try to keep my time frame.
If you'll speak up, yes, people who are on Zoom can hear you better.
Okay.
You might need to project a little bit.
You want me to move the microphone?
Yeah, we can.
Or
Just
just
have to get in there.
Happy to be the roadie. I'm not as bright as I used to be.
that's too close.
Do we want to move this team?
We can. We can.
There we go. That works.
All right.
Yeah. Thanks.
That'll be better.
I think it's appropriate you're taking this up. What we're going to do is reinvigorate the religious support for women's rights in general, and reproductive rights in particular. So I'm going to have a little history of this just to refresh ourselves. Why did how I got involved in this? You could start many places from my grandmother, who was a midwife, did abortions. I didn't know until she was dead. High school had really became big. I had a momentary crush on a freshman girl who I wanted to date. I just transferred to this school from Athens. It was the big city, 5,000 population. Our country school had burned. And so I had a new boyfriend, and I was telling him at recess.
I'm having trouble hearing you.
I was telling him at recess that I wanted to date her. He said, "Oh, you can't do that. She's got a kid at home."
Wow.
Well, of course, that was the end of it. She was Athens was a progressive school, so she was actually allowed to attend the classes, but she could only be on campus for classes. Otherwise, participating in no extracurricular activities. Well, I found out his boy was pregnant, and he was Mr. AHS, football team was, and having gotten her pregnant, I gave him a notch up. So he was a big man on campus. Her life was ruined. And I thought then, this is not fair. Something needs to be done about this. I never thought I'd be doing this. I mean, I was just a high school kid. I just thought this doesn't seem fair. And that was the end of it. On the surface, I think deeper it was still never left me. it's a common story. Nevertheless, when it happens to you, it's your story, you know, so it becomes, you really begin to feel it. Well,
Hey, would you speak? I can't hear you. I'm having very good. And so I'm gonna read, but I really do want to hear this.
okay, I can try to speak more distinctly.
Even with my,
It's recorded, so, yeah, it's okay.
yeah,
You can hear later.
Yes, yes.
So in the next thing, I went into the sixties, and I was supposed to do some work in San Francisco. I was trying to talk about this new movement, so I became very active in the sixties. Integration, racism, you know, human rights, war. But we got like some of these discussions that they would, some young women would speak up. They were encouraged to, we have an issue going on. What issue do you have that we're taking up, we have taken up all the important issues. What do we not take up? She said, well, we said, women's reproduction, we can't really be equal if we can't control our reproduction. We can't plan our careers, our lives. We want to have children when we want to and not have them when we don't want to. This was in the sixties, and it was I agreed. I thought that, and it took me back to the high school situation immediately. No, I believe that. So later we came to the, I'm an ordained minister myself. I joined with the Unitarian University. I was in medical school, and when I went back, I became president of the Unitarian Fellowship College. And the minister there is just working with the national UG and on women's rights. And they asked me if I would be a consultant on abortion as a doctor. And what I knew that was a great deal. I mean, care training for John Peter Smith, provided I did, took care of a lot of women for having abortions. We now realize I think we're still having to do this, but we just overlooked that. Then I don't think we believe that really on the work, most of the work, because after abortion came, they disappeared. These women are no longer in the emergency rooms.
Are people okay if he takes his mask off while he speaks?
Yeah.
I just want to know the room.
Yeah,
Okay, yeah,
I think it's a little muffled.
I know, yeah,
And for my voice, I'm in a temper.
yeah, I hear you.
Now, I said yes, and then later, if you recall, there was Reverend Moody, Church in New York. He established the first group of ministers who would, he just thought, well, let's do this, help women to find where to get an abortion. And it became known as the clergy consultation for problem pregnancy. They began to be formed around other parts of the country, mostly independent groups, but a lot of them, because they developed a training program to talk with women in counseling, and they tried to refer them. So they formed one in Dallas, Texas. The chaplain, assistant chaplain, said it. They were both graduates of Perkins Theological School. And they asked me if I would be their consultant to find services available. Well, I mean, there were plenty of midwives scattered around the country. That wasn't what they were finding. I found out very quickly doctors who were doing this, and they weren't telling you. John, would you like to do abortion? And they said, what are you talking about? I don't do it in my office. And I what we're doing, but I mean, who's going to that? So I found that there's some places going Mexico, Cuba, this one, Japan, but these were expensive. That's what I want to have much success again, a big company of doctors to to do abortions, illegal abortions, of course. So one day, one of the chaplain from SMU, he called and he come to talk with me. I said, yes, of course. Well, I was a little apprehensive, and I had reason to do it because the first thing he said was, well, Dr. Boyd, would you consider doing the abortion? I said, you're only asking me to risk my medical license, going to prison. I have a wife, 3 children. This is a big ask. I understood the ask, but still, that I need to think about this. I wanted to do it, yes, but should I? Could I? And in the end, I said yes. I think I knew I was going to say yes. I would have been radicalized at that point. And so I moved to Dallas, though, because it's a small town. I've got hospitals. But in Dallas, I found it a lot easier. I was at robberies, like hell several times. Then it was 2 women came. They were a couple. One of them got pregnant, and she very much wanted an abortion. So when I got there, I found out she had talked to the Dr. John Peters Hospital, where I'd done training, to see if he knew me. She was all of us an RN. She worked at the hospital and knew. Found out, yes, good record. Then she went to talk to the district attorney, Tarrant County. And it turned out that, of course, he was a friend of mine. He said, yeah, he's a good person, good doctor. I don't know about the abortion, but he's a good person, a good doctor. And she comes to see me, and she's telling me all of this. And she came in a van, and station wagon. She had IV fluids in the back, and she was going to go take it. So I declined to do the abortion. I thought, she's already talked to too many people. Confidentiality is I went around to describe. I saw patients only from the clergy consultation. They referred patients. I saw no one except they'd seen a minister first, and then they would refer them to me. So I told her, and so then she said, well, we'll go to the district attorney and report you. I said, well, you've got the wrong information. I don't do abortions. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know where you got your information, but it's incorrect. And I said, but further than that, do you think I would report me for not having done an abortion or for having done one? So, well, that was there was too much controversy over that. District attorneys have state meetings. It's all over. I mean, it's getting unmanaged. So I decided to go to New Mexico, Santa Fe, which it is a Mecca at that time. It was a very liberal, no one cared. I had great support there. No one ever made this issue. But what this comes full circle, we come full circle. This is the circle. So there I was flying women, so they flew women. The clergy consultation was scheduled women. They would fly as a group. Some people would come on their own, but they'd give them a call. They were such a group. They flew. We met them at the airport in Albuquerque with the van, usually about 12 women. We drive them to Santa Fe. I felt safer in Santa Fe. I'm not Albuquerque there, but I did not feel safe in Albuquerque. I felt safe in Santa Fe. That's true or not, regardless, that's what I tell them. So I went to, so we they'd fly early in the morning, we'd be from the van, bring them down Santa Fe, do their abortions, and late afternoon, take them back there. That evening, they're back home. So you see that what we've come to then is the same thing. Like abortions are now always the first 6 weeks. Abortions will be next year. They'll be illegal in Texas. The Supreme Court, I won't tell you, is going to rule unfavorably. We're going to have Texas will eliminate abortion altogether. They've already made it clear through the administration. They want Texas to be an abortion-free state. And they're not including it for anything. Not rape, not incest. So that means we're going to be back to flying with it where they need to go if they have any chance. And many poor women, they can't afford the transportation, lodging, they may be involved, maybe they have childcare, what if they have to have a job, what if they, it's not that easy, even if you say I'll do a free abortion for you. I'm not against it. I mean, it's still a burden. So it's hard times are upon us. And that's what I want you to know. And Joe's going to talk some about that. Later on, Joe's going to talk about what we're doing. And I'm going to say no more about that. She's running that program. This is, I'll say on her behalf, her introduction. And RCRC is one of these, I think it's the best in the States. They're very active. They're not a think tank. They're not that they're not capable of that, but they're doers. I mean, they work. They in the trenches with us, working, taking care of patients, giving them food, lying back and forth, back and forth to the airport, trying to pick up their medicines for them. I mean, it's incredible that what they do, and I have great admiration for that. The intellectual part is good. I'd like to see we need to do more than that. So that is where I'm going to stop. And I'm going to.
And I want to speak briefly because what I want to be sure is that we have plenty of time when we're finished to interact. And also let me know, can you hear and understand me, or should I take this off?
If everyone is comfortable, you can take it off.
Better?
I feel not comfortable. Keep it on if you're on.
What, to my mind, what an important part of what Curtis's story illustrates is the either little known or little remembered fact that the strongest support for legalization for the late 60s and early 70s came from the feminist movement and from organized religion from churches. And the First Presbyterian Church was one of, it's more than a handful, a large number of Christian denominations that had position papers and openly and actively supported the legalization of abortion. And that's been lost along the way with legalization. And I want to start with confession. I'm a psychologist. So the power and importance of religion to our patients in particular. My confessional part is I've been slow to recognize that. I saw this through a psychological lens. And it's patients who set me straight and taught me how very important it is. And what I came to realize is how powerful going through the clergy, which I at the time saw as a barrier, in order to get to a reputable doctor and to be reassured by a clergy, and they were virtually all men. So I'm not in error when I say clergyman. Being reassured that you were going to somebody who was licensed and reputable and whom that clergyman knew was very, very reassuring. That part I got. What I didn't realize until much, much later was that patients who got their abortion through that route had an almost unconscious, certainly unspoken understanding that God was with them, that what they were doing was acceptable in God's eyes, that there was an understanding, forgiving God, and their situation was appreciated, and they were not losing connection with their faith, whatever faith that was. It took me years to really get that, and then to realize that we made a mistake in letting our religious connections to organized churches kind of filter away because they weren't as necessary to us. So that the only silver lining to the horrible situation that women, particularly poor women, who find themselves pregnant at an ill-advised time and are being forced to carry pregnancy to term and go through the risks of the pregnancy, the risk of delivery. The only silver lining is that, again, churches are reemerging as active supporters of women's reproductive rights and active opponents to enforced pregnancy. And that is, without doubt, a good thing. Horrible way to get there, but a very, very good thing. And I think that there are many, many stories I could tell you from many, many years of experience with patients. But what I want to say, most importantly, I think, is I had come to believe that, and then 7-8 years ago, we had a really lovely, intelligent counselor in Dallas, where patients also walked a gauntlet, a horrible gauntlet, to get into our building. And what she observed was that those patients' perception was that religion was outside of our doors, damning them to hell, calling them names, standing in their way, opposing them as humans, and condemning them. And she came to us and said, couldn't we have religion in an organized way within our doors as well? And Curtis and I said, you bet. And all along the way, our counselors, I developed a counseling program, have been talking with patients about their religious or spiritual beliefs and how that comes to play and all of that. But just the presence of a designated official religious person within our walls has been a wonderful experience. We have a minister or rabbi present in the surgery center at least one day a week. And patients may or may not talk to her or him. They may or may not talk in much depth, but they know that they are there. And that's how we've come to build this coalition with Joan and her organization through the Unitarian Minister in Dallas. It's what Curtis is saying. We are coming sadly full circle. But part of why we're here with you today is we want to make the best of coming full circle for our patients, not the worst. I'll turn it over to you.
Now we want to tell them the market and standards and tell you what we're doing. This gets down to what you were and what is what we're doing. So Steve.
Yeah, thank you, Curtis and Glenna. Thank you. So I'm Joan Lavanian Sanford. I'm the director of the New Mexico Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice. We are connected to 10 other RCRC affiliates with various forms of that name. Our national office recently chose not to continue their connection with the state affiliates. That's a whole different conversation about working in the real work in the states or the panic work in DC, and the tension between national organizations and regional organizations. So I started with the local affiliate here as a phone bank volunteer. And so, be careful what you volunteer for. You might end up with a job and a career that you really love. And one of the first tasks, Planned Parenthood had the clinic that's over on San Mateo had seen a real increase in protesters and kind of an emboldening of protesters, and asked us if we would provide some escorts. And so we started setting that up. And then one day I had a call from one of our escorts who was a retired curmudgeon Presbyterian minister that some of you might know, Will Sawyer, who said, there are a couple of women here from out of Albuquerque, and they're going to have to stay overnight, and they have no place to stay. What are we going to do about that? So we figured out what to do about that, because what had happened 20 some years ago is some of our partner organizations here had taken New Mexico to court. New Mexico is one of the few states with an equal rights amendment. And they had persuaded the court that if Medicaid covers all of men's health care, why doesn't Medicaid cover all of women's health care? And our state Supreme Court said, well, you are absolutely right. So in New Mexico, Medicaid covers all of women's health care, including reproductive health care, including abortion care. And at that time, the previous administration had just let the decision sit there. A new administration was then tasked with how do we make that work, rulemaking, contracts with insurance companies. And so it turned out we needed to create a pool of volunteers that would help with transportation, that would welcome people into their home from the rural and remote areas of Mexico. And so we started doing that. We did it very well, because most of our volunteers were considered people of faith. And then as that decision was more normalized, and because New Mexico is such a rural state, if you need to see any kind of specialist, you probably go to Albuquerque. And Medicaid knows that, and they provide a van, transportation to get you there. And so they had to start doing that with people around the state who were coming here to see abortion providers. And so there was less and less need for us to do that around the state. We still do, but not to the level we were before. And just as that need was starting to slow down, Dr. George Tiller, who was a specialist in abortion care and abortion later in pregnancy, was murdered, assassinated in Kansas, in his church. And which was, a terrible shock to all of us. Dr. Boyd had recently, actually because of an arson at his previous smaller clinic, moved into a much larger facility. And was able to persuade the doctors that were working with Dr. Tiller in Kansas to come to New Mexico. And so now there was a need for us to provide care for people from all around the country coming to New Mexico because of this need of this kind of specialized abortion care. And so we continued doing that. And then more and more states, Texas in particular, but everywhere, started increasing restrictions on abortion. It started with, 20-week bans. And, the purpose of that is to, get a foot in the door. And then we saw the 20-week bans go to 16 or 12 or 6 now in Texas. This has just been an ongoing kind of thing. And so I think we were fortunate that we were able to build this structure, this foundation, so that now with the situation we're in with Texas, that we can, take this full circle as Dr. Boyd has so beautifully reminded us. And so in December, we did our first trial run of what we're currently called Pastoral Care for Abortion Access. We have 2 more scheduled for January, one for the 14th and one for the 28th. And each of those, our target is 20 rather than 10 or 11. And I think the one thing that is so essential for you to know is, as these bans are enacted around the country, these are not the actions of a people who have a moral, personal, small group, spontaneous desire to protect life as they see it. These are people who are also being manipulated. Their faith is being used as a political tool, and that this is part of a much larger movement, a much larger white supremacy, Christian nationalist movement about who makes the decisions and who is in charge in our country, and even what does our democracy look like? Are we a theocratic autocracy? Or are we a democracy that has the majority rule while still protecting minority rights? And abortion is a very convenient tool to that end. And if this becomes something that you as a group get into deeply and study, I would encourage you to look at an organization called the IRD, that religious. I'll forward that to Stephanie. That traces how that decision was made to use abortion as the convenient wedge issue here. And that's really important to know, because where we have lost ground is giving a legitimate soapbox and making this and counting these bans and these tools as a legitimate religious belief, where it's not. yes, there are many people who are passionate about that, and they are being used and exploited to these ends. And so it's essential that the progressive movement and the progressive religious movement really stand up and speak loudly on this. So I think that's probably a good place to start for questions.
Yeah. Well, that was a lot. I guess I'll just open up the floor for questions for any of our three guests. And this is my first time moderating things online. So if anyone sees someone with a question, let me know. All right. I think everyone's just kind of absorbed.
Yeah. Take it in, take a deep breath.
Thoughts or comments or
If you want to Zoom in, have any questions, often you feel like you're less participating, so you can ask questions. Sure.
or if you'd like to type a question in the chat, we could see that too.
What do other countries do with this problem? Are they having? Is it because you're a Christian country? You're having, or we just have more fanatics than the normal country does?
The question was, what do other countries do with this problem? Is it the same elsewhere, or is there something special about us here in America?
Right.
Well,
I mean, it's important to remember that our roots in religion, but also in capitalism and white supremacy came from Europe. And, we've recently seen though a couple of countries in Europe really open up their abortion laws, in particular France and Ireland, which were considered two kind of strongholds of the Catholic Church. But the issue there are protesters, there are movements against abortion, and in lots of countries it has spread as a political tool, definitely. But also what's interesting is the clinic gets quite a few, and we provide support for many patients from Canada, because Canada's national health care actually covers, of course, all of their care, including abortion care, but they do not have a specialist in abortion and later in pregnancy, like Dr. Boyd does. So Canadian patients are flown here using their country's health insurance and provided with a place to stay, and the procedure is paid for. We step in to help with some of the smaller details, like a ride from the airport, a care package with some hygiene items and microwavable pot pies and granola bars and things like that. But that's a wonderful example of a country that's doing it right.
Yeah. From national health care, they're very good. They were for patients. For the primary referral source for back. So they pay the rent, their airfare, lodging, all the health care. They'll even pay for someone to fly with it if they need it.
That's
They pay both of them. And so it's, they don't have doctors finding late-term abortion. There are a limited number of doctors that do that. Put some more skill for it. So we have some in this country, but many countries don't have it. It's a lack around the world. When you go down the first time.
Is there a question in the chat?
I don't think in the chat, that's
Okay.
earlier.
Okay.
I had a question, if when Roe falls, how much capacity do the networks in New Mexico have to increase their care for women in other states? Especially because in this last legislative session, we overturned the ban in New Mexico. So New Mexico, yeah, the state.
So what I would say, we're going to, my prediction, we're going to get an unfavorable ruling next to the Supreme Court. States are going to, how far they go, I don't know. Texas is also going to be involved in some specific case. So I think the states may be given almost carte blanche to experience. So Texas will, and I think that where they're going to be a situation of women are going to find themselves some way to go from anti-abortion state to a pro-abortion state. And there are going to be about 15 states that are fairly open. There are going to be 20 states we know are going to close. Some states don't sure just how far they're going to go one way or the other. But it's going to be a huge, if you look at Texas, what you have to do, there's 60,000 abortions a year done in Texas. That's over 1,000 abortions a week. 1,200 abortions a week. Now, not all of those women are even going to try to get out of Texas. A lot of women, they give up, they think children, work, family, confidentiality, or they just they're too frightened. And the people coming that have never even been to an airport, they don't almost go to the plane, they don't know, it's just frightened. And in some of the remote areas in any state, some of them, they've never, we once spoke at food house, that there were women there, more the women than the men. There were women there who never been sanitized. And all their life, never, maybe they've been a few times tested, never to sanitize. It was, and so you can imagine to go get home. Well, that's not as true today, but it's still true. So I'm saying that women are intimidated. Different. Anyway, a lot. I'm looking at another building now that I can offer, a rich, big space. And we have doctors. I have contact with a lot of doctors who work for us at Dallas, and a lot of young doctors. So, but when you got to get the doctors, but we can actually, I think, with the two facilities, we can provide 500 abortions a week. So that's half. So, but then there's the medical school clinic, and there's Planned Parenthood is here. They're looking at where they could expand. Getting the doctors will get to be limited. I mean, you can get the building, you can equip it, furnish it, you can do all that. You got to have a doctor. So we got enough doctors. It doesn't take a lot, but you got to have. So.
And
I wanted to.
I was gonna ask you, that's what I was gonna.
Yeah, I mean, so I think Curtis is, Dr. Boyd is absolutely correct. We will, if we don't completely lose Roe this summer, we will lose, it may remain as nothing more than a shell, but we will lose it. And I want that to be very clear to you right now. Also, what needs to be clear though is we're not going to go back to what we saw in the 60s and 70s. Women are clergy now. Women are lawyers. Women are doctors, and we are less dependent than we were then on men. That's not to say that it won't be dangerous. That's not to say that people won't die. They will. But we have medication abortion that is now available by mail and
in some states,
and probably available by mail in other states. Just under the table. That's just yeah.
They're Texas can't do that.
Right.
It's illegal. I mean, it's illegal in Texas. So
Right.
people tell them it's illegal in Texas. So if you send it down, criminal offense for which I'm in charge. So we do it in New Mexico now. We have a telemedicine program in New Mexico. It's very good for the rural area of southern New Mexico. We see a lot of them doing our telemedicine program. But Texas, I can't do it unless somewhere to declare that telemedicine can't be prohibited.
So in addition to being connected to our other religious coalition affiliates, we are a member of the National Network of Abortion Funds who have been looking at this for several years and making plans. And also as a completely different example, the national part of the network of abortion funds has been intentionally increasing the capacity of the member state level abortion funds because they know what's happening and what's coming. So New Mexico will absorb a lot of it, but we cannot take all of it. And so we are going to have to rely on these grassroots networks to get people from these abortion prohibited states to states where abortion is legal. And that will happen through the network. It will happen through a rebirth, I guess, of the clergy consultation network. That's a part that we're trying to really make sure that happens. What's really important for you to know is the original clergy consultation network was not underground. When they started, Reverend Moody put a notice in the New York Times. And so it's really important that we follow that model, that abortion is safe, legal, normal, and not stigmatized, not criminal, not wrong. And so also it's very important in your conversations to not use terms like underground railroad, because that's a whole different connection and really minimizes that essential work that was done there when people were enslaved. And that was so much. To compare forced pregnancy to enslavement is wrong, and that needs to be mentioned now. And so, although it might feel similar in our lives now, it's not. And so it's really important not to use those terms, and also to make sure that we are visible and out there, that this is that we are responsible. We are not responsible to lawmakers in Texas. We are responsible to a higher law, and that's what we're going to do.
And you'll notice New Mexico is going to be a major outlet. So I'm going to, we as an organization and RCRC of health, we have two big problems. One, the primary responsibility to expand services, physical facilities, doctors. But New Mexico is the primary outlet for all small Texas. And there's going to be from Texas to the Atlantic Ocean, that will be nuts. Okay. So when you come this way, Albuquerque is the first place you come to. Colorado will be open, but it's closed. And you go to the West Coast, California, Washington, Oregon will be open. That's a long flight. So people are going to get Albuquerque if they can when they go to the West Coast. And Chicago will be open the next. So you can see that the big centers, friends in Chicago, they have a large center and we're working together to see what they're going to try to expand, because there are a lot of states around them that they're going to fill in. So, but it has to be who has the ability to borrow enough money To build a large facility is several $1 million. It's a big project and operating. So there's going to be a limited number of people initially. The next thing is money though. See, if you were going to say, if you're going to bring 25 or 30,000 women to New Mexico, whatever it is, it's a large number. It's millions, tens of millions of dollars. It's huge. I mean, it is, and not all these are poor women. 40% of the women in Texas are Medicaid eligible. 40% of the patients we see in New Mexico are Medicaid patients. 40% of Medicaid. So what we know is a high percent of women are poor to low income. They cannot get here on their own. That means that a high percent of these patients are going to need financial assistance. So what Joe and I have been already talking about fundraising, we've got to go national. We got to have some large donor foundations national. We can put that kind of money into develop. It's going to be a huge program. New Mexico can't solve that. New Mexico cannot. There's not the money to do it in New Mexico. We don't have those events. But Texas does. We'll raise a lot of money in Texas. Raising the money is one thing. The people on the ground working, it's another thing. And then having facilities with the doctors is another thing. So all of these it's a huge undertaking. We're going to have to take it. We already have started. Instead of this program, it's a little program now, but we hope that it's several of
Our goal is that this is a model program and figure out how to make this work.
Also, I just want to lift up and then I'll, that, you know, as Reverend, as Stephanie mentioned, you know, New Mexico, we had a pre-roll ban on our books that was repealed in the last legislative session. What part of that was actually still enforceable, which was a physician-only requirement. And so now one thing that will help New Mexico absorb these patients is that nurse midwives, PAs, nurse practitioners can provide abortion care now in New Mexico. And abortion is so safe that there is no reason why advanced practice clinicians can and shouldn't provide it. And hopefully, you know, that's something that more of the abortion-friendly states will be able to take on as well.
One last quick, I saw a hand back there.
Yeah.
You know,
If you talk about this right down here, that's fine, just say, we'll talk to you later. But I'm also concerned about the relationship between birth control and abortion, because I know we see many places not want to provide birth control, or insurance and all of that. So do you know what percent of your patients would have benefited from better access to birth control, or do you provide that counseling? And if you already talked about that.
We absolutely do contraceptive counseling and write prescriptions, insert IUDs, do all of that. And another kind of lost fact in this is the majority of women we see seeking abortion have been on birth control. So we see a number of birth control failures. We also see a number of women who, for one reason or another, stopped their birth control because they could no longer afford it. Okay, so yes, access to particularly the long-acting reversible contraceptives is an essential part of good women's health care. I think that's what you were getting at.
It's a misunderstanding that women are getting pregnant for those who are not using birth control. Most of them are some form of birth control. And some are not the most effective, can't afford it. So they use what they can afford, which may be condoms.
Which is actually very effective.
It's 85% effective. So but it's not like as good as others. So and Next, there's a misunderstanding, but we have a huge country, 250 million people. There's a million abortions a year. That's not a lot. So abortion is not, it seems common, all this whole blue, but it's not that many women who need abortion, actually. And I often, in New Mexico, yeah, the percent is smaller, but the later abortions are really 1 out of 100,000, it's just, but they add up, that's 250 million people, you total them, it comes up to a big number. But women do, our experience, one of the, here's these stories all the time, women, but there are a lot of other reasons for even incest, there's contraceptive failure, even if you have, well, they say birth control and that kind of birth control pills, 95% effective, that's free. That's 5 out of 100 use of birth control to get pregnant. But you got a million women using birth control, you take 5 out of each, and that's up to a lot of women. So they were using birth control, highly effective, but it's not 100%. So it gets misleading. I almost do all the abortions for the residents next to months. That's how they don't have enough doctors. Now we have enough doctors down on the right way. Down in southern New Mexico, never will, because it's a specialty. What's a specialty practice? When you couldn't do it if you wanted to, you get run out of town, or you couldn't live there. So as in the cities, abortion is going to stay in the cities for now for a long time until we change the social. Family practitioners, they can do early abortion things, MDA, manual vaginal aspiration, they can use medical aids, they can do all that. Family practitioners, they can be taught that in the pregnancy to do it, but when they don't plan to do it, but when they go do the Texas, they're not going to do it because they get run out. And their practice gets started, they get it, all the time, you can't survive it in the family. You get picketed in church, at school. And first thing you know, no doctor that wants to practice with you say you're on your own. They want to rent your property or sell your property. You can't get insurance. I mean, it's you see them.
Yeah.
So it's people understand all the barriers. The ultimate solution that's way out there. The ultimate solution is that all primary care doctors will learn to do MDAs, medical manual vaginal aspiration. You don't have to have their substance things and all this equipment and surgery equipment. You can just have that in your office. You only want to do one a month. If you're a family practitioner, you might do one abortion a month. All doctors, if they're in a small town. So you could do those for 12 weeks. You could be trained quite to do what happens. Then above that, they come down through. But the hospital, during the first 12 weeks, very few are after that. We got a lot of emphasis on that because, that's what we do. We see women from all over. And in other countries, Canada, and other countries, as well as all the United States. So we're specialty practice we're doing, and they're very confused about them. So much of this is it's confusing. And they get misled. You see on these, think, oh my God. When they say abortion capital of the world, it's not far off. I think that's what they put on us. But because we're seeing women all over the world.
So we're good. Back here.
Just a quick question. Can you expand on what you meant by abortion being I get the legal part of it and the rights part of it, but how is it normal?
Because it's a decision that's not made in a vacuum. People who choose abortion do so because of the responsibilities they have to their family, to the family that they want to create in the future, the family they have now. We really need to center that ethical, many times prayerful, deliberative decision that women make on how and when to grow their families.
And when I hear you say that, I hear you saying it as the opposite of stigmatized. Because so often abortion is stigmatized in every case, and so I hear you saying normalize, not a stigmatized decision. So we're going to have a lot more time to talk about this next week. Next week, we'll be looking at some of the study papers and the policy statements from the PCUSA. And so we'll be getting into more of the theology behind it and going deeper into that discussion. I'm so grateful that you all could join us here today. How about I close up this back?
Let me join you one more minute. I'll tell you something, so like this. I have a story that struck me as very powerful. It's a 13-year-old girl, she's pregnant, and she wanted to have an abortion. I was like, what? So what's this about? And she said, well, I'm a child myself. I can't be a good mother to this child. And I was like, well, so that being a good mother is important. What's that? Why is that? She said, well, I'm going to have a child. I want to be a good mother to this child. I want to be responsible. And I thought, well, this is a 13-year-old girl, and she's thinking in ethical, moral terms. She's thinking, no, what is my responsibility in this future to the child I would have? What is my responsibility? Can I fulfill that responsibility I place on myself, which is a proper responsibility to place on yourself? 13 years old. Don't think that these young, they don't know, they think, oh, they don't think about it. I promise you, they think about it.
I know.
No, they think about it. Some of them think pretty deeply about it.
All right, everyone, take a deep breath. Let's pray. Gracious God, we do give you thanks for your grace as we have these complicated conversations. We pray that as we continue to think and study and learn, we would approach this conversation with compassion, with grace, with understanding, with justice. God, we thank you that you are a God who wants to see all life thrive, and we lift up all those people who see the burdens of especially those who are poor, for women who don't have access to the health care they need. And we thank you for those who are doing all they can to support them, to help them. We thank you for clergy who are leading the way and thinking about this topic and walking alongside those who suffer. We pray for our continued conversation next week, that we would approach it with grace and compassion. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Almost.